All right, folks, hello and welcome back to online English class. Today we are going to be beginning our work on OTN 6, so we should have a pretty brief class ahead of us today as we simply establish an SQ3R for this section of text, and then we are going to analyze a multi-layered prompt that basically unpacks the significance of Conrad's use of anticlimax and his break of the frame narrative to develop Kurtz's character and illuminate a shade of the inner truth hidden with Kurtz. All right, so before we get there, let's just run quickly through our top of the week announcements, all right, together. Okay, first and foremost, you need to make sure that you are continuing your discussion grade procedure duties on a daily basis. Aside from that, you need to make sure that you are continuing your reading of Heart of Darkness Part 3 throughout the course of the week. I should already have your confirmation of your OTNs 2, 3, and 4 if you have not done that. That email is late by 2 days. All right, you will receive a late grade for that if you turn it in late, obviously. Okay. Aside from that, you need to continue your work on your OTNs as we complete them in class. Today, you'll complete your SQ3R for this section of text, just requiring you to go back, recite what happened, write a summary of this somewhat confusing area of text, and to think about how it fits into the rest of the novel's plot. All right, and finally, make sure that you are continuing the drafting process for your quarter 4 essay. Okay, so without any further ado, all right, let's not extend this any longer than it needs to be. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our analysis of the SQ3R for this section of text. Okay, so our speaker for this section of text is Marlowe, our first-person narrator, and he is, once again, narrating throughout the course of the novel his journey to the Congo. And this journey is, as we already know, in terms of genre and style, a kind of symbolic journey narrative. It's a pilgrimage, okay? So to summarize his character development up to this point, it's good to kind of look back and summarize things generally in order to give us a baseline understanding of what's going on. All right, he leaves his home in Europe. All right, so he leaves Europe and he's searching for this kind of idea at the back of his life. All right, so he's a meaning seeker. He's a pilgrim. He, like pretty much all human beings to some extent, searches for some kind of moral coherency to his life, and he wants that coherency to extend beyond a simple sentimental pretense. He recognizes that the work of his life, very much like the work of the Belgian Congo Company or any colonist or any individual representing any kind of society or civilization as a whole, needs to be motivated by some kind of true idea, some kind of truism that is an authentic reflection of an idea worth living for, not just a feeling, okay? Because feelings are relative and deconstruct into this sort of infinite relativism in which we don't have any kind of moral coherency. We just have our feelings. We have what we feel is right, but not something that is authentically right. So again, he's looking for this kind of idea at the back of his life. But while he's in the Congo, all right, he is confronted with the increasing moral or the revelation of the moral incoherency of the company that he's working for, all right, the Belgian Congo Company, and he is very troubled by the kind of testimony of mankind, human beings' capacity to live fraudulently, okay, to say that they are, say, bearers of the sacred flame, spreading the benefits and the progress of Western civilization into the dark corners of the world, even as they oppress and exploit the individuals that are there. Very, very much like the Belgian Congo Company claims to be something that they are not, so too, more specifically, individuals like the bricklayer or the manager claim to be something that they are not, right? When in truth, they are just empty men, men with no entrails, right? And this fraud that is in the hearts of men, and also in Marlowe's heart as well, as he participates in that fraud, as he works for the Congo Company, as he allows himself to deceive the brickmaker. It obscures reality, and it complicates the process of truth seekers finding and arriving at a kind of understanding of a truth that's worth living for. Okay, so further into the Congo, Marlowe is confronted by more troubling information about the broken world that he lives in. Not only are the individuals who live in that world broken, deceitful, and fraudulent, but the world itself, all right, seems to be hostile. The natural world is hostile to moral idealism. Deconstructing any kind of optimistic or romantic hope that Marlowe had in discovering a kind of natural law that orders or normalizes human behavior. Okay, so a traditional Western worldview, for example, like a Christian worldview, or a secular humanist worldview, or an Enlightenment rationalist worldview, very similar to like Thomas Jefferson's worldview. They're all share a kind of common optimistic hope that there is some kind of transcendent or heavenly uh, 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 rule of law that is revealed generally in nature about how human beings ought to be treated. Okay, they ought to be treated as if they, according to Jefferson, have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That human beings are born equal and not equally, stupid and meaningless, but rather equally valuable. And law codes and societies and governments ought to be built around this notion that human beings are valuable. Okay, and that is revealed to us in nature. It's self-evident. It's part of what Enlightenment philosophers and theologians would call natural law. Okay, but the only natural law that Marlowe finds in the Congo is that there is no law. The one law is survival of the fittest. Okay, and beyond that, there are no rules. And when you try to establish rules, moral ideals, when this human creature, this man, right, this human being who is different than every other living creature in his ability to construct abstractions, in his ability to philosophize, to consider ethical and moral questions, to dream up and imagine the possibility of God. Okay, even if those gods are false, even if he made them up, his capacity to do so speaks to the fact that he's different. All right, and here in that natural world, the man wants to instinctively, impulsively create a kind of morally coherent world for himself, and nature is hostile to that process. It doesn't support it. It doesn't reward it. Rather, it seems to attack it. It seems to attempt to deconstruct it at every turn. Hence the fog. Hence the attack. Hence the symbolic significance of Marlowe steaming upriver to Kurtz. The fact that he is in every way going against the grain of nature. Nature seems to brood over him with as an implacable force attempting to destroy him, to disintegrate him, and also his moral idealism. Okay, after the attack on the steamship, Marlowe is devastated by the thought that he's never going to get to speak with Kurtz, a man who he views as someone who will help him define the meaning of his existence. Now, of course, Marlowe must do this alone, as the modern individual has to, as the modern existentialist must. He must define the meaning of existence, the meaning of his existence for himself. But he views Kurtz as a person who will help him do so. A kind of teacher, a kind of instructor, a kind of what Plato would call a kind of philosopher king, someone that will help lead Marlowe to an enlightened life. All right. So, what's the genre and style? We've already mentioned it. It's a symbolic journey narrative. What is the title of this particular section of the text? Well, it's part 2, and we're looking specifically at page 108 to 117. This is after the attack. And here, Marlowe does something weird. Conrad, the author of the book as a whole, okay, the creator of Marlowe, the structure of the narrative, seems to make a weird, a strange choice. All right, Marlowe gets so upset after the death of the helmsman, after the attack, after losing what he thinks of as an opportunity to fulfill his destiny as a pilgrim. Right, he's so upset that he loses the thread of his narrative. Okay, he loses the tapestry that he's trying to build. Okay, it makes him lose the thread. And he takes a break, and the narrative breaks back, okay, or the frame is broken, and it cuts back to Marlowe on the Thames, and he's quiet for a long time, and he asks for some tobacco for his pipe. He wants to take a quick smoke break, right? And then he breaks in to this anticlimax is a literary device that is used. Okay, watch. An anticlimax is just simply a literary device used by an author when they are building to a kind of rational climax, like normal stories do. Everything is sort of building to this climax. Everything in the narrative is building to the climactic revelation of who Kurtz is. Is he alive? Right? This increased suspense that is introduced at the after the attack. Is Kurtz actually alive? Is he dead? Is he gone? Was the whole journey pointless? What is Kurtz going to be like whenever he meets him? Is he actually going to be a good man? Is Marlowe going to find what he's looking for? All of these questions center on this climactic revelation of Kurtz, okay? And the whole journey narrative has been pushing and driving to and steaming toward, all right, the inner station and Marlowe's conversation and meeting and encounter with Kurtz. And instead of allowing the reader the satisfaction of arriving at that climactic moment, Conrad deploys what is called an anticlimax, right? Marlowe spills the beans about Kurtz's true identity. He tells us before we should know, right? He tells us that Kurtz is not dead, ruining the suspense, okay? He also reveals that Kurtz is not an altruistic or humane man, okay? He's not a humanitarian. He's not a moral paragon. He's not down in the Congo spreading the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, okay? He's not giving of himself and sacrificing all of his wealth for the work that he went to the Congo to do, which was to spread the good news of humane and humanitarian morality and moral ideals. He is not that man. Rather, he is a deeply selfish man. All right? The narrative structure that Conrad uses here is intentionally deployed to disappoint the reader in the same way that Marlowe is disappointed, to diffuse the logic of the narrative, just as the logic of Marlowe's pilgrimage doesn't resolve the way that it should. Okay, the tragic revelation of Kurtz as being not the man who Marlowe wanted him to be, okay, which is a tragic revelation. It's something that is deeply disappointing to Marlowe, something that he's going to have to unpack and learn to live with in part 3. That's the major idea of part 3, by the way, okay? But the fact that the tragic revelation is not given to us in a logical, coherent, tragic plot, say like Oedipus the King's plot, in which the narrative drives to this climactic moment of tragic recognition. Yes, it is sad, but it makes sense. Here, the plot, the plot structure itself is dissatisfying and illogical. Okay, it doesn't build to a satisfactory climactic moment. Okay, rather, Marlowe ruins the climax here, disappoints, displaces the natural part that the climax should play in the narrative. Okay, so just as the logical plot structure that should accompany a tragedy is abandoned, so too the tragic revelation is made all the more troubling. Okay, so the central question of our analysis over the next couple days is going to be, how does the style of Marlowe's narration illustrate the significance of Marlowe's experiences in this section of the narrative? Well, to quickly recite what happens, all right, after describing the attack and the death of the helmsman, Marlowe loses the thread of his narrative. Okay, so I'm speaking figuratively here, but you probably should understand the resonance of that figure of speech, right? He's sort of knitting together this yarn, right? This story, this sailor's tale about the significance of his journey, about the significance of his pilgrimage, but he loses the thread. All right, he can't keep the story together. All right, and he breaks the frame, and it returns to the Thames momentarily, where he describes the fact that he wanted more than anything to be able to listen to Kurtz speak, to allow Kurtz to teach him how to live. All right, Kurtz is in this sense a kind of like a prophet or a teacher, again like a Messiah figure, the good teacher, right? Teacher is oftentimes what Jesus is called in the gospel. Why? Because Jesus had something to say, something to teach individuals that was true about how they ought to live. Repent. The kingdom of God is at hand, right? Follow me. I am the Messiah. Okay. He wants to hear Kurtz speak, right? And he reveals that he did indeed hear Kurtz speak. And his words were powerful, but they were also filled with selfishness and unmitigated, unapologetic greed. Okay, what does that mean? He says that Kurtz was worshipped as a god by the native inhabitants of the Congo, and that he allowed them to worship him, and that he accepted unspeakable sacrifices to him, which seems to imply human sacrifices on his behalf, engaged in unspeakable rites and religious ceremonies done for him as God. All right. He explains that Kurtz had been asked to write an essay earlier, prior to his immersion in the Congolese setting, prior to his elongated stay in the interstation by this group of people called the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs. All right, and he writes. Kurtz still keeps this essay, by the way, and Marlowe gets to read it while he's in the interstation with Kurtz. And it's this eloquent reflection on humanitarian aid and how to best spread civilization and suppress savage pagan practices in the African continent. But at the end of this thoughtful essay is written at the bottom of it like this sort of addendum or this edit, and it just says exterminate all the brutes, and that's it. Okay. All of these things illustrate the ways in which Kurtz's moral idealism is stripped from him whenever he goes and immerses himself in the Congolese environment. Okay, even so, Marlowe recognizes that Kurtz is an exceptional man. He says that he won't be forgotten, even though Kurtz is not an exceptionally good man. Okay, so we'll explain part of what Marlowe means when he says that. All right, he says that Kurtz will be remembered by Marlowe, even as Marlowe is telling the story of Kurtz now. Okay, so Marlowe is actively remembering Kurtz and memorializing him. Okay. So Marlowe then sort of snaps out of the anticlimactic revelation of the nature of Kurtz and goes back to the story that he has already ruined. Okay, so the attack comes to an end. Marlowe pulls the steam whistle of the ship, and all the natives who are attacking the ship run away. Okay, so Marlowe and the crew arrive at the interstation and are met by this weird individual named the Harlequin, a person who is dressed like a joker, dressed in a patchwork, like a quilt of a shirt, who follows Kurtz and does what Kurtz says. He's the Russian trader that's been referred to throughout the course of the narrative, and he, like Marlowe, considers Kurtz to be a kind of prophet, and explains that Kurtz has expanded and enlarged his mind. Okay, so tomorrow we'll be analyzing some of the details, the significance of this piece of text, and how it fits in to the central themes that Conrad has been developing throughout the course of the narrative. Okay, so I hope you guys have an excellent day. That's all we have for our class today. Might be a good day to work on your quarter 4 essay. All right.